Why do people believe in God? It is one of the oldest and most fascinating questions we can ask. Some believe because they feel they have experienced something beyond themselves. Others believe because they were raised in environments where religion was presented as the natural truth of life. And for billions of people today, belief in God feels so obvious and so necessary that questioning it almost sounds strange. But when we look at it through psychology, history, and human behavior, the picture becomes far clearer. Believing in God is not only about faith. It is also about how the human mind works, how culture shapes us, and how our brains are wired to look for patterns, meaning, and comfort. To understand the psychology of believing in God, we first need to consider the way humans experience fear and uncertainty. For as long as humans have existed, we have faced forces we could not control. Storms, earthquakes, droughts, diseases, and death itself. Before science explained these things, people invented stories to give them meaning. If a storm came and destroyed crops, it was not just a storm. It was a sign from the gods. If disease spread through a village, it was not just germs. It was a punishment or a curse. In this way, the human mind, desperate for explanation, filled the gaps with something powerful and intentional. This tendency is deeply psychological. Our brains hate uncertainty. We would rather believe in something, even if it is incorrect, than sit with the discomfort of having no answer. Even today, we can see this tendency in small ways. If you are home alone and you hear a sudden loud sound, your first reaction is rarely calm logic. Instead, your brain jumps to possible causes. Was that someone at the door? Was it something dangerous? Our minds are wired to look for agents behind events, because in the past, assuming there was a cause, even an imagined one, helped humans survive. Belief in God often works the same way. People see lightning and think, surely someone must be behind this. They see the complexity of life and think, surely someone must have designed this. But fear and survival are only part of the story. Another deep psychological reason people believe in God is the need for comfort. Life is difficult, unpredictable, and often filled with suffering. We lose loved ones. We get sick. We face failure and disappointment. The idea of a God who loves us, who watches over us, and who promises justice after death, is one of the most powerful sources of comfort the human mind can create. For many people, it is easier to face life's hardships when they believe there is a plan behind it all. A mother who loses her child may cope by believing her child is in heaven. A person who suffers poverty may feel strength by believing that God has a purpose for their struggle. Psychologically, this belief serves as a shield against despair. This is why belief often rises during times of crisis. In wars, in famines, in natural disasters, religious devotion tends to increase. People turn to prayer not because it changes the physical world, but because it changes how they feel about their situation, reduces anxiety, and gives them a sense of control, even if that control is imagined. In fact, studies in psychology have shown that when people feel powerless, they are more likely to believe in supernatural forces. It is not necessarily about evidence. It is about the human need to cope with fear and suffering. Another reason people believe in God has to do with childhood learning. Children are natural believers. When adults tell them stories, they usually accept them without question. If you tell a child that Santa Claus comes at night with gifts, they believe it. If you tell a child that thunder is angels playing drums, they believe it. This is not because children are foolish. It is because their brains are wired to trust authority figures, especially parents. In early human societies, this trust kept children alive. A child who questioned everything their parents said might not survive long. So when parents and communities teach children that God exists, children absorb it deeply. By the time they grow up, belief feels as natural as speaking their language. This also explains why people across the world believe in different gods, depending on where they are born. A child in Pakistan might grow up Muslim. A child in Italy might grow up Catholic. A child in India might grow up Hindu. Each child accepts their version of God as truth, not because they researched all religions and compared them, but because belief was planted early, before critical thinking fully developed. Psychologically, this early conditioning is extremely powerful, and for many people, it lasts a lifetime. Then there is the role of community. Humans are social creatures. We crave belonging. Religion offers not just belief, but also a sense of being part of something larger. Going to church, mosque, or temple is not only about God. It is about family, friends, rituals, and identity. For many people, belief in God is tied directly to the comfort of being included. To doubt or leave the faith can mean losing social ties, respect, or even safety. That social pressure makes belief harder to question. From a psychological perspective, people often believe not only because of inner conviction, but also because of outer reinforcement. An example of this is how strongly people defend their beliefs when they feel they are under attack. If someone questions their faith, many react emotionally, even angrily. Why? Because belief is not only an idea, it is connected to family, culture, and personal identity. To question God is, in a way, to question who they are. The human brain is designed to protect the self, so defending belief can feel as natural as defending one's own body. But belief in God is not only about fear, comfort, childhood, and community. It is also about the way the human brain sees patterns. Our brains are extraordinary pattern recognition machines. This ability helped humans survive. Seeing paw prints in the mud and connecting them to the presence of an animal meant the difference between life and death. But this same ability sometimes makes us see patterns where none exist. Psychologists call this agency detection. When we hear a voice in the wind, we might think someone is speaking. When we see shapes in the clouds, we imagine animals or faces. In the same way, when people see order in nature, they often assume there must be a designer. This is not always a rational conclusion. It is simply how our brains work. Consider a simple example. If you toss a coin 100 times, the sequence might look random. But if the coin somehow lands on heads 10 times in a row, your brain cannot help but feel that something intentional is happening. Even if you know the laws of probability allow such a result, your instincts scream that there must be a cause. Belief in God often operates in this psychological space, where pattern and intention are assumed, even when randomness is a sufficient explanation. Another psychological factor is morality. People often believe in God because they feel morality requires a higher source. They cannot imagine how right and wrong could exist without a divine lawgiver. This belief is not necessarily based on philosophy. It is based on how people are taught to think about rules. From childhood, rules come from authority figures, parents, teachers, leaders. So when thinking about morality, the mind naturally extends this model upward, imagining the greatest authority of all, God, in this sense. Belief in God feels natural because it mirrors the structure of authority humans experience from birth. Yet, history and psychology show us that morality does not require God. Human beings have created moral systems in every culture, often shaped by practical needs. Societies that valued cooperation and fairness survived longer. Groups that practiced compassion and loyalty had stronger bonds. Over time, these social behaviors became moral norms. But to many believers, morality still feels incomplete without a divine source, because psychologically, authority and morality have been linked so closely in their minds. So far, We have looked at fear, comfort, childhood conditioning, community, pattern recognition, and morality as reasons people believe in God. But there is another fascinating dimension: the human imagination. The ability to imagine things that are not physically present is one of the most powerful features of the human mind. It allows us to create stories, plan for the future, and build civilizations. But it also allows us to imagine gods, heavens, and afterlives. The same mental power that creates novels, movies, and myths also fuels religious belief. When someone imagines God watching over them, that image feels real in their mind, even if there is no physical evidence. To illustrate, think about how powerful fictional characters can feel. Millions of people cry when a beloved character dies in a movie. People wear costumes of superheroes, feel inspired by them, and sometimes even shape their lives after them. These characters are not real, yet they have a deep psychological effect. In a similar way, imagined gods can feel real, powerful, and meaningful to believers, because the human brain treats imagination with emotional seriousness. When we think about belief in God, it is tempting to imagine it as a purely intellectual choice, like solving a math problem. But in reality, belief is far more emotional than logical. For most people, it is not the product of weighing evidence, but of how belief makes them feel. This is why arguments against God, no matter how rational, often fail to persuade. If someone believes because it gives them hope, safety, or meaning, then no logical reasoning can easily take that away. You could present 10 scientific arguments, but if belief helps them survive emotionally, their psychology will push back against doubt. This leads us to another key point in the psychology of religion: cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance happens when people hold two contradictory ideas at once, which causes discomfort. To reduce that discomfort, the mind finds creative ways to reconcile the conflict. For example, if a believer sees something cruel in the world, like innocent children dying from disease, they might feel tension. After all, if God is loving, why would this happen? The dissonance is uncomfortable. So the mind creates explanations. Maybe suffering is a test of faith. Maybe humans cannot understand God's plan. Maybe it is punishment for sin. These explanations are not necessarily logical, but they reduce the inner tension. Psychologically, the believer feels relief because the dissonance has been resolved. We all experience this in other areas of life too. If you buy an expensive item and then realize it was overpriced, your mind will find reasons to justify the purchase. You might tell yourself it is higher quality, or it will last longer. In the same way, religious believers often defend God in the face of contradictions because their minds are trained to reduce dissonance rather than accept the discomfort of doubt. Another psychological process tied to belief is confirmation bias. Humans tend to notice and remember things that support their existing beliefs, while ignoring or dismissing things that contradict them. If someone believes God answers prayers, then every coincidence becomes proof. If they prayed for good weather and the rain stopped, that is a sign. If they prayed for healing and eventually recovered, that is confirmation. But when prayers are not answered, those moments are often ignored or explained away. Confirmation bias creates a feedback loop, where belief generates selective attention, which in turn strengthens belief. Think about how gamblers behave in a casino. A gambler may remember the times they won and feel they are lucky, but they often ignore or downplay the many losses. This selective memory reinforces the belief in luck, even though the reality is different. Religion often functions the same way. Believers highlight the hits where something aligns with their prayers, while dismissing the misses as mysterious or unimportant. Closely related is the human tendency toward magical thinking. Magical thinking is when we believe that unrelated events are connected, or that our thoughts can influence reality. Children display magical thinking often. A child might believe that if they wish hard enough, something will happen. Adults are not free from this tendency either. Rituals like crossing fingers, wearing lucky charms, or avoiding unlucky numbers are examples of magical thinking. Belief in prayer and divine intervention often fits into this psychological pattern. People feel that their words or rituals can influence powerful forces, even if there is no evidence. This brings us to ritual itself. Ritual is a crucial part of religious psychology. Humans find comfort in repeated actions, especially when those actions are tied to meaning. Whether it is kneeling to pray, lighting a candle, or reciting chants, rituals create a sense of stability and order. They soothe anxiety by making the unpredictable world feel more manageable. Even outside religion, rituals are everywhere. Athletes often repeat the same pre-game routines. Students develop lucky study habits. Families celebrate birthdays the same way each year. These rituals give life rhythm and predictability. Religion simply amplifies this human tendency, linking rituals to cosmic meaning. Another interesting psychological factor behind belief is mortality salience, the awareness of death. Human beings are the only animals that live with the constant knowledge that they will die. This awareness is terrifying, and psychologists argue it is one of the strongest drivers of religious belief. Believing in God and an afterlife helps people cope with the fear of death. It transforms the unknown into something less frightening. Instead of imagining death as final, believers see it as a doorway to another existence. Studies in psychology show that when people are reminded of their mortality, their belief in religion often becomes stronger. This is known as terror management theory. For example, if someone is asked to think about their death before answering questions about faith, they are more likely to express stronger belief in God compared to someone who was not reminded of death. Death anxiety is such a powerful motivator that it can push people to cling tightly to religion, even if they are not devout in other areas of life. We can see this clearly in hospitals, during wars, or at funerals. In those settings, religious practices surge. Prayers, rituals, and appeals to God become more frequent because the psychological need for comfort is at its peak. Belief becomes a tool to manage existential fear. This does not make the belief true or false. It makes it understandable as a deeply human response to mortality. Another fascinating angle is the way belief in God can give people a sense of purpose. Human beings are story-driven creatures. We do not just want to survive. We want to feel that our lives have meaning. Religion offers a ready-made narrative. You were created by God. You have a role to play, and your life contributes to a larger plan. Psychologically, this is very appealing. Without such a framework, many people feel lost, as if life is random or meaningless. For believers, God fills that existential gap, providing direction and significance. We can compare this to how people often find purpose in non-religious stories as well. Nationalism, for example, gives people a sense that their lives contribute to the destiny of their country. Ideologies and political movements do the same. Even fandoms around sports or entertainment give people identity and purpose. Religion simply does this on the largest scale possible, by tying personal existence to the cosmic order of the universe. For many, this is irresistible. Another reason people believe in God is the way the brain processes mystical or transcendent experiences. People sometimes report feeling a presence, sensing unity with the universe, or having visions during meditation, prayer, or even by accident. Neurological studies show that certain parts of the brain are responsible for these sensations. Temporal lobe activity, for example, has been linked to religious visions and feelings of presence. Psychedelic substances can also trigger intense mystical experiences, often indistinguishable from religious ones. When people undergo such experiences, they often interpret them through the lens of their culture. Christian may feel they encountered Jesus. A Hindu may feel they connected with Krishna. The brain generates the experience, but the cultural context shapes its interpretation. These experiences are very convincing to those who have them. If someone feels the overwhelming presence of a divine being, no argument can easily shake that conviction. From a psychological perspective, the brain is capable of producing sensations so powerful that they override rational thought. This is one reason why mystical experiences are reported in all religions throughout history. They are not proof of a specific God, but proof of how human brains can create intense feelings of transcendence. Social psychology also plays a huge role. Humans are deeply influenced by group dynamics. If everyone around you believes something, you are far more likely to believe it too. This is not weakness. It is a survival instinct. In early human tribes, being part of the group was necessary for survival. Disagreeing with the group could mean isolation, which often meant death. So humans evolved a tendency to conform. Religion takes advantage of this tendency by creating large, unified groups where belief is the norm. People adopt the beliefs of those around them, not necessarily because they are convinced, but because belonging is essential. Peer pressure does not always feel like pressure. Sometimes it feels like natural agreement. If a child grows up in a household where everyone prays daily, the child will likely adopt prayer as normal behavior. If a teenager lives in a community where going to church is part of identity, they may attend, even if they are unsure about God. Over time, repeated participation turns into internal belief. The psychological need to fit in can be just as strong as the need for logical consistency. One more psychological layer is authority. Humans respond strongly to authority figures. When a respected leader or teacher says something, people are inclined to trust it. Religious leaders throughout history have used this psychological tendency to strengthen belief. When a priest, imam, rabbi, or monk claims special knowledge of God, followers often accept it because authority itself carries weight. This is not unique to religion. We see the same thing in politics, education, and even celebrity culture. But in religion, authority is reinforced with claims of divine backing, which makes it even more persuasive. When we look at all these factors, fear, comfort, childhood conditioning, community, authority, imagination, rituals, mortality, and hope, it becomes clear that belief in God is not one single thing. It is a combination of psychological needs and human tendencies that have been evolving for thousands of years. But there are even more dimensions we have not yet explored, and they reveal just how deeply belief is woven into the human mind. One of these dimensions is the psychology of control. Human beings dislike feeling powerless. The world often feels chaotic, filled with events we cannot predict or control. Religion provides a sense of order and predictability. Believers can feel that someone is in charge, that their lives are guided by a higher hand. Psychologists call this an illusion of control. Even when people cannot actually control outcomes, they feel calmer if they believe that someone else, especially an all-powerful God, is in charge. This reduces anxiety and makes life's randomness feel less threatening. We can see this in small ways too. Many people have superstitions about sports, exams, or travel. They feel that if they wear a certain shirt or follow a certain ritual, things will go better. Logically, they know this may not make sense, but emotionally it gives them confidence. Belief in God works in a similar way, except on a much larger scale. It provides the greatest illusion of control imaginable, the idea that nothing happens outside the plan of a divine being. Another important factor is identity. For many people, belief in God is not just about the divine itself, but about who they are. Religion is tied to family traditions, cultural practices, and social belonging. To reject belief in God might feel like rejecting one's ancestors or one's community. Psychologically, this makes belief stronger, because it is not just about a concept, but about personal identity. If you ask a believer why they hold their faith, they may not always give you logical arguments. Instead, they will speak of family, heritage, and community. Belief becomes part of the self, and questioning it can feel like questioning one's own existence. This is also why conversion, changing from one religion to another, or to atheism, is often so difficult. It is not only an intellectual shift, it is a deep psychological and social upheaval. People who leave faith traditions often report feelings of loss, loneliness, or guilt, even if they no longer believe in God. This shows how powerful the psychological roots of belief are, and how deeply they are connected to human emotions and social bonds. We should also talk about guilt and forgiveness. Religion often teaches strict moral codes, and when people fail to live up to them, they feel guilt. But the belief in God also offers forgiveness, which provides emotional release. This cycle of guilt and forgiveness is psychologically powerful. People may continue to believe because the system gives them both the burden of sin and the relief of grace. Without belief, they may not know how to process these feelings. Fear is another strong motivator. Many religions teach not only about God's love, but also about God's punishment. The fear of hell or divine wrath keeps believers obedient and faithful. From a psychological perspective, fear is one of the most effective ways to shape behavior. Even if someone has doubts, the thought of eternal punishment can silence those doubts. This fear may not always be visible, but it lingers in the background, reinforcing belief through anxiety. There is also the effect of repetition. Beliefs become stronger the more often they are repeated. Hearing the same prayers, reading the same texts, and listening to the same sermons makes ideas feel familiar and true. Psychologists know that repetition increases acceptance, even when the content is questionable. This is known as the illusory truth effect. When something is heard again and again, the brain begins to treat it as reliable simply because it is familiar. Religion has always understood this principle, whether consciously or unconsciously, by embedding belief in constant rituals, songs, and recitations. Memory also plays a role. People often remember their religious experiences in selective ways. A powerful emotional moment in prayer may stay with them for years, shaping their belief. At the same time, moments of doubt may fade from memory. This selective remembering strengthens faith over time, even if the evidence for belief has not changed. Now, another angle to consider is how belief in God can give people social advantages. In many societies, being seen as religious brings respect, trust, and connection. People are more likely to trust someone who appears devout. Politicians often use religious language because they know it connects with voters psychologically. In this way, belief can also be reinforced by social rewards. Even if someone has private doubts, they may continue to express belief because it brings them status and acceptance. Over time, the line between public performance and private conviction can blur. We should not ignore the role of storytelling. Religion is built on stories, creation myths, miracles, parables, and sacred histories. Human brains are wired to understand the world through narrative. A story with characters, conflict, and resolution is far easier to believe than abstract arguments. The story of a God who loves humanity, or of a prophet who sacrificed for others, resonates deeply because it fits the way we naturally process information. Psychologically, stories are more persuasive than statistics or logic. Religion has always used this power of storytelling to make belief in God feel alive and personal. Another psychological phenomenon worth mentioning is projection. People often project their own desires, fears, and ideals onto their concept of God. For some, God is a loving father who provides care and protection. For others, God is a strict judge who punishes wrongdoing. These images often reflect the believer's own psychological needs or cultural upbringing. The God that people believe in says as much about them as it does about the divine. Psychologists have long noted that people tend to imagine gods who reflect their own values, fears, and hopes. We also see this in how societies shape their gods. Agricultural societies often worship fertility gods. Warrior societies often worship gods of strength and battle. The psychological needs of the community influence the character of the divine. Belief in God adapts to what people most desire or most fear. This adaptability is one reason why belief has survived for so long, across so many cultures. It is also worth noting how belief interacts with mental health. For many, belief in God provides a framework that reduces stress, gives meaning, and promotes resilience. People who are religious often report higher levels of life satisfaction, not necessarily because God is real, but because belief gives them tools to handle suffering. On the other hand, religion can also cause guilt, fear, and suppression of natural desires, which can increase mental distress. Psychologically, religion is a double-edged sword, offering both comfort and burden. So where does this leave us? If belief in God can be explained by so many psychological factors, does that mean God is simply a creation of the mind? For many, the answer is yes. Belief is the result of human needs: fear of death, desire for comfort, longing for purpose, pressure from society, and the brain's natural habits of pattern-seeking and storytelling. All of these factors combine to create a powerful sense of certainty, even when the evidence is not there. Yet understanding the psychology of belief does not only help us explain why others believe. It also helps us understand ourselves. Even if you do not believe in God, you are still human, shaped by the same psychological forces. You may not turn to religion, but you still seek meaning, comfort, community, and hope in other ways. Some find it in philosophy, some in science, some in relationships, some in art or activism. The human mind is always searching for frameworks that make life bearable and purposeful. Religion is only one of the oldest and most enduring versions of this. The important takeaway is that belief in God does not need to be mysterious. It does not require assuming divine intervention or supernatural explanation. It can be understood as a natural product of human psychology, shaped by our fears, our hopes, our social bonds, and the way our brains are wired. Belief persists not because it is necessarily true, but because it is deeply useful to the human mind. When you step back and see this clearly, you begin to understand why belief is so widespread, and why it has been so resistant to change. To challenge belief is not simply to challenge an idea. It is to challenge human psychology itself. That is why rational arguments alone often fail. Belief is not just in the head, it is in the heart, in the community, in the rituals, in the memories, and in the stories people live by. So the next time you wonder why people believe in God, remember that the answer is not found in theology books alone. It is found in psychology, in the way humans cope with life, in the way we make sense of the unknown, and in the way we build meaning from our experiences. Religion is not just a set of claims about the universe. It is a reflection of what it means to be human. And perhaps the most fascinating part is this. By studying why people believe in God, we do not just learn about religion. We learn about the human mind itself, our fears, our strengths, our creativity, and our endless search for meaning. Belief in God, whether true or not, is one of the clearest mirrors of human psychology ever created.